Assalamualaikum, greeting and good afternoon to all of you, and especially good morning to Prof. David Jones for joining I believe for a research paper. We have a honorary speaker, Dr. Lavanya. She is the coordinator for the postgraduate students at University Civil Environment and Engineering Department, University of Technology PETRONAS. And we have a guest speaker, Prof. David Jones from Center of Built Environment Faculty of Computing, Engineering and Built Environment at Birmingham City University, UK. I would like to invite Dr. Lavanya Balu as a Fiji coordinator, Civil Environment and Engineering Department, to talk a few minutes with the student and give a welcome talk to the guest speaker of David John Edu. So I give over the mic to the honorary speaker, Dr. Lavanya Balu. Dr. Lavanya, are you here with us?
Oh yes, Mujahid. Thank you very much. Thank you to the MC.
Welcome.
Yes. So I will proceed. Good afternoon, everyone. So I am Dr. Lavanya Balu, the senior lecturer at University Teknologi PETRONAS and also the postgraduate leader. Our valuable guest today, Professor Dr. David Edwards. The professors, lecturers present here, the president of the PGSCEE and his ESCOs of the 2021 academic year, students, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to all of you. On behalf of our chair, Associate Professor IR, Dr. Bashar Mohamed, I would like to thank you for allowing me to deliver the welcoming remarks. It is indeed an honor for me and all Civil and Environmental Engineering Department members of University Teknologi PETRONAS to welcome our guest speaker, Professor David John Edwards, to deliver his sharing session about writing a skeletal plan for a research paper. Before that, am I audible? Is my voice clear to all of you? Okay, thank you. So let me introduce our valuable speaker. Professor David John Edwards is a professor of plant and machinery management. Sorry? I am audible, right?
Yeah, your voice is clear now.
Okay.
You may proceed.
Okay, thank you. Professor David is a professor of Plant and Machinery Management, Faculty of Computing, Engineering and the Built Environment from Birmingham University. He is also an honorary professor at Deakin University, Australia. Prof. David owns personal research interests focused upon the multidisciplinary area of plant and equipment management within business. Topic studies include engineering design, equipment finance, information technology, ergonomics, health and safety, and productivity measurement. In recent years, he has broadened his areas of expertise into other engineering and business management fields, for example, econometric forecasting, innovative finance, marketing, and plant operator competence and training. In total, he has published over 350 scientific papers in some of the world's leading journals and has self-generated in excess of £12 million of teaching and research funds. His publication was cited and referred in more than 8,000 articles. His latest research project include two Innovate UK KTP worth about 450,000 million. Besides that, he has accrued considerable leadership and management experience at several higher education institutes in this country and abroad. He is currently a professor of plant and equipment management at Birmingham University. And also, Prof managed his own business for over 10 years and worked as a subcontractor for some of the UK's largest construction and civil engineering companies. As you all can see, our speaker enjoys a tremendous experience in the academic field, and he is here today to share his experience with us and to add to our knowledge. I welcome you again, Prof, to UTP Malaysia, and I am sure that we all will enjoy this valuable session. Thank you. And I pass the floor back to Mr. Mujahid. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor.
Yes, welcome.
Yeah, am I audible to all of you?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah,
We can hear you.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Lavanya Pralu, for the warm welcome to the Prof. David John Edwards. Next, as Dr. Lavanya explained very well about the Prof. David Jones, that he has more than over 350 peer review publication and have a citation is almost reached to 8,000 with NH index of 47 and I-10 index is 162. So without more explanation, I just want to hand over the mic to Prof. David John Edwards to please proceed with the session. But before that, I just provide you some guidelines for the session. Before we proceed to the session, it's a humble request to all of you that please mute your mic and close your camera upon the entry. And if you have any queries during the session, you may raise your hand, and according to the situation, Prof. David will answer your queries. And if you have any question, you may note down the question, and at the end of the session, there will be a question answer session. So I hand over the mic to Prof. David John Edwards. Prof, are you here with us?
Yes, I'm still here. Thank you.
Okay, I just want to stop sharing my screen. You may proceed to share your screen now.
Okay, thank you. Well, good evening, your time. Good morning, my time. And thank you for the very warm welcome this morning. I very much appreciate the kindness and generosity shown by colleagues at the University of Petros. Some of the bibliometric details that were shown this morning are a little out of date. I think my publications now are close to 450, not 350. But if you want to have a look, you can always follow me on ResearchGate or look me up on Google Scholar, and you can see more details there. So, what I would like to do this morning is to guide you through this notion of writing a skeletal plan. Now, I've worked on research papers for, I don't know, 20 years or more. And what I do find is that there is a cookbook recipe to writing a research paper, and I want to share that cookbook recipe with you all today. So the session is about structuring your first research paper. As a postgraduate community, it's important that you publish your research and publish your research in good quality journals wherever possible, because the number and quality of publications is your currency as a young researcher, and other researchers will look up to you the more you publish and the more you become established. So you've got my details on the screen there. My university email address. I do tend to, or I have tended to talk to Ahmed to set this up on my home email, but my WhatsApp number's there, my ResearchGate profile. So please do feel free to follow me on ResearchGate. And just to talk about today, we're going to cover an introduction to the skeletal plan. This will be followed by the rationale behind the skeletal plan, the basic structure for writing your research paper and the contents of such, the key narrative within that structure, templates for creating a skeletal plan, and finally in-text citations and references. Now, I do warn you all this morning, I am working from home. So if someone knocks my door today, the postman or someone else, my dog will bark. So I do apologise for any disturbance in advance. So at the end of this skeletal plan session today, you should be able to then start thinking about working your own skeletal plan, talking to your supervisors and starting your own first research paper. So first of all, let's look at the skeletal plan and what it involves. Well, if you were an artist, I'm using a an analogy here. If you're an artist, you wouldn't simply start taking a load of paint and daubing it onto a canvas. What you would tend to do is to create a preliminary sketch first, so that you could see the outline of the proportion of the artwork to make sure that you have sufficient detail in that artwork. A skeletal plan is exactly the same, in that what you do here is, like that artist, you write out the skeletal plan, you write out the sketch, if you like, and you get the bare basics of the paper in place first, so that you know what you're going to write about within each section. This also helps you remove any repetition. It helps you to not put any materials in there that are unnecessary, and it enables you to create that red thread of writing from the start of your paper right through to the very end. Now, the process I'm going to show you today could be worked or could be used for a research project, a research report, or indeed a research paper. So please bear that in mind. And the process itself will only take a matter of minutes, but it will save you days or even weeks of time and effort trying to write a paper virtually from scratch. Now, there's a three-stage process involved in writing a skeletal plan. Stage one is to first of all delineate and write down essentially your title, aims, and objectives of your research. Now, these title, aims, and objectives at this early stage are very broad. They tend to be all-encompassing, but once you then move on to your next stage of writing on your, looking at your literature review, you can then begin to refine and hone those title, aims, and objectives, and start to then write down that skeletal plan, detailing all the key sections in your paper or report. Once you've got those bare bones, a skeletal plan, you can then start to flesh out those individual sections and start to write those sections in manageable chunks. Now, the first ever paper I wrote took a monumental effort just to start writing the paper. So if you can work on this, what we would call almost a baby step first, that first step just to write the skeletal plan, then writing a paper doesn't seem quite so daunting, because you've already created the logic and structure for the paper to then begin to fill out. So, using another metaphor, a skeletal plan is really a little bit like a coat hanger. This allows you to hang on the detail of your research onto the coat hanger, which acts as a structure for your research paper. Sorry, I seem to have some background noise on the background. Could I ask people to turn their sound off, please? Thank you. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to now guide you through a former student's work, Dr. Chris Roberts, who's now graduated. Chris worked through his undergraduate degree first, then went on to do his PhD, and a real success story for my own institution. So let's hear a few words from Chris. Let's hear a few words from Chris about his experience here.
Hello, my name's Chris, and I'm going to talk to you today about skeletal plans. Skeletal plans allow you to construct a framework for your work from the very outset of your project. Developing a skeletal plan is a fantastic way of organising your work, and importantly, ensures the points that you are trying to convey are clearly received and understood by the reader. It's important that your work unfolds in a logical way that is accessible to your intended audience. Remember, whilst you may have developed your own knowledge and ideas on your chosen subject, the audience you are presenting to may not have done so. To maximise the impact of your work, unpacking the subject in a clear and logical way will greatly aid the reader in following the arguments you are presenting. Also remember, facilitating the reader's understanding of your points will aid in achieving the desired outputs of your work. Developing a skeletal plan is an invaluable strategy for achieving this. If you haven't come across this approach before, you may be surprised that this approach is regularly used in a vast array of professional settings, from legal briefings and documents, academic work and publications, policy documents you will interact with in your chosen profession. I would hazard a guess many novelists and writers, as well as those developing media productions, also conform to this technique. Are the lyrics and written music of a song to be performed not in fact the skeletal plan of that performance? Consider the meetings that you may attend in the future or are attending in your professional lives at present. The agenda outlined before the meeting gets underway is the skeletal plan for how that meeting will unfold. This ensures all the required points are covered and nothing is missed, as well as supplying a framework and preventing the meeting from veering off into tangents which are not necessarily relevant to the aim of the meeting. A skeletal plan for your work can also have this effect. By logically planning out your work from the very beginning, you can avoid expending unnecessary effort developing material and discussing points which, while seemingly relevant at the time, do not actually add anything to the particular argument which you are presenting in your work. Adding logic to your work is not the only advantage of developing a skeletal plan. Structuring your work from the outset allows you to better manage the work you are undertaking. By utilising a skeletal plan, you can break down your work into manageable chunks, assigning schedules and achieving different aspects of your work as you go along. If you remove the skeleton from a vertebra, all that will be left is an amorphous blob of muscle, organs, skin with no structure. Don't let your work be an amorphous blob of information with no structure.
Okay, thank you, Chris. So that was insight really from one of my, as I say, former PhD students, and they've now written in the last 12 months 12 research papers, 8 of which in Q1 journals. So they use this same approach and it works particularly well for them, and I would suggest that it could work particularly well for all you guys present today. So let's look at the rationale behind the skeletal plan now that we've looked at the purpose. So what I often find is people come to me and they say, David, you know, my topic is really huge, there's lots of literature or there's no literature, and I simply do not know where to start. This is a common thing for anyone starting to do research, and it's nothing to be worried or concerned about. I can always come back and give other classes at a later date on using scientometrics or techniques like that, where you can reduce a vast range of literature down to a few key areas. But this is a common problem. And what a skeletal plan does is that it, first of all, it gives you bite-sized manageable chunks of work to do. It also allows you to gain direction for your research so that you know exactly what you're going to do, the contents of what you're going to do, and more importantly, how you're going to do that research. It also allows you to plan your time well. And that's really key because you can waste a lot of your time doing running around, being very, very busy, but not achieving much at all. So with a skeletal plan, it allows you to identify tasks that you can do on a weekly basis, and that actually helps you to then reflect on your progress each week and try to identify what are the things that have stopped you from making the progress that you envisaged. And self-reflection and time management are really key here if you want to be a successful academic and impart that knowledge gained to your students. It also allows you to incrementally develop your ideas and test these with your supervisor. Now, again, that's key because we don't work as humanity within a bubble. We are interconnected, we are very social animals, and we do like to confer with other people, gain confidence of other people, as well as, test our ideas with those supervisors to make sure those ideas seem robust. Now, don't worry too much if your supervisor doesn't always agree with you, because actually that's the process of academia, that on occasion, your ideas will develop and you may have disagreement, but that's perfectly natural. As long as you're involved in that discourse with your supervisor, then that's the main important thing there. So let's now look at the basic structure of a skeletal plan, and more specifically, what that contains. Now, some people assume that writing a research paper is an iterative process. We start off with the title, we move to the abstract, the introduction, the literature review, the methodology, the analysis, the discussion, the conclusions, and finally then the references. In essence, what you've got there in those titles is a very rough draft skeletal plan, isn't it? Because you can see within these sections, these are the main constituent parts of any research paper. But do you actually start writing the paper in that manner? Well, the answer is no, because actually the process is more recurrent. You often start with the title first and then move to the literature so that you can understand the thesis and antithesis within that literature discourse so that you can better understand the arguments that are being raised within that literature. From that point, you then go on to develop a methodology, the analysis, and the discussion. And then at that point, you may go back to the title and think, actually, now that I've done all this work, does the title still reflect the work that I've conducted? And at that stage, you can then start to look at the abstract and the introduction too. So please don't think that you have to start writing in that iterative fashion. Let's now look at the key narrative. Let's look at a bit more detail at each of these main section headings. So the abstract, I always recommend a structured abstract, which would include a purpose, a methodology, the findings, and the originality. If you can write 2 sentences on each of those areas, you don't have to use the subtitles unless you're writing an Emerald journal. But if you can use those headings, what you actually find, you write a very clear and informative abstract. Moving on to the introduction. There are 4 ideas here, and what I would suggest to you all is to use the metaphor of a picture frame. So first of all, in the first paragraph of your introduction, you should be thinking about the big picture. What is the contextual boundaries of the research that you propose? And that's what this picture frame does. It sets the boundaries of your research. In the second paragraph, you should then focus on the specific area of research that you're going to investigate within that big picture. And then within that space, what is the problem domain? That should be the third paragraph. And then finally, what the aims and objectives of your research paper are. So let's say we were now doing something on the environment. The big picture would be you know, the fact that we've got a booming population, we've got limited resources, we've got global warming, we've got all these pressures upon the planet, and we need to be able to take decisive action to be able to mitigate the risk that humanity has upon the environment. The specific area could be that we may want to look at renewable energies, and we may want to look at photovoltaics in particular. The problem domain may be that many of these PV cells or photovoltaics actually contain heavy metals, and the disposal of those heavy metals once the product has reached its end life is quite difficult, and therefore we might want to do some research looking at how we can recycle heavy metals safely. That then leads us on to the aims and objectives. The aim is what you aim to do, and the objectives are what you hope to achieve as a result of fulfilling that aim. So in an objective, make sure that you do not write things like conduct a literary review or identify challenges or problems, because that's what you would talk about within the methodology itself. The objectives are what you hope to achieve, and in this context you would hope to achieve a reduction in environmental impact, for example. That would be a real objective for that example research. Now, there is this notion that a literature review is very much a list of papers of what people have written in the past, and that is no longer the way that we write now in the top flight academic journals. So a literature review now should include, let's look at some of the don'ts. Never entitle the section heading as a literature review, rather name it after the section content. Try to avoid a shopping list of in-text citations, because that lacks synthesis of literature. Try to avoid more than 3 tiers of subsections. Try to avoid essay-style narratives. That's what we tend to use at school level. And try to avoid writing in the first person for STEM-based subjects. Always write in the third person style in preference. In terms of the things we do need to do, always use subsections to create a logical narrative, and that's what you should be using in your skeletal plan before you even start to write. Use bullets to highlight key points made. Insert figures and tables. Add more of these where you can to substantiate the points being made or argue that, you know, the facts that you're presenting are factual. Use electronic databases. Scopus is a very popular database. So is Web of Science, but you can also use Google Scholar and of course ResearchGate too. All those databases are ideal opportunities for you to demonstrate your knowledge and understanding. And also this notion of infographics. Insert infographics to demonstrate your synthesis of ideas and concepts. Instead of writing maybe 10 pages of essay-style narrative, why not use an infographic on a single page to explain a phenomena under investigation? And that's a really good technique for you to be able to use. Now, one of the things that's very popular these days in literature reviews, particularly of contemporary research papers published in the last maybe 5 years, is this notion of scientometrics. Now, the scientometric graphic that I'm showing you there has been produced by VOS Viewer. That's VOS Viewer. VOS Viewer is a bibliometric tool that you can literally download a database from Scopus or Web of Science. You can download this software free of charge. You can then upload your database into the software, and it will conduct this bibliometric content analysis for you automatically, so you can then start to analyze a mass of data almost in an instant. These bibliometric or scientometric graphics are visual aids. They demonstrate synthesis, they demonstrate an ability to use content analysis, and they are incredibly easy to use. The difference between scientometric and bibliometric is simple. A scientometric chart looks exactly the same, but it only refers to peer-reviewed research paper literature. Bibliometrics may include peer-reviewed papers, but also conferences, textbooks, and other material. That's the only difference between those two terminologies. You can also use word clouds. Word clouds work in a similar way that they use content analysis of a narrative, and these are particularly useful if you're going to use interviews as your data collection technique. And for this word cloud here, you could use NVivo, which has a cost to your institution, but the other software that I would recommend is Voyant Tools. And Voyant Tools is an open source piece of software that you can search for in Google today, and you can use immediately for your literature synthesis. When we come to methods and methodology, you have to again think of an analogy that the methodology is a toolbox. It's the container that contains the methods within, and those methods represent those tools that you actually use. And that's the easiest way of understanding the difference between methodology and methods. I would always point you towards using Saunders Research Onion. Saunders Research Onion is an excellent graphic. You can access this graphic online via Google, and it guides you through the things that you need to consider when you're writing your research paper. So you must always start your research paper starting off with a broad philosophy that you've adopted, whether it's interpretivism, positivism, realism, critical realism, etc. The approaches you've then adopted, deductive, abductive, inductive, or critical reasoning. The strategies you've adopted, whether it's case study, experimental data, whether it's a survey, action research, and so on. Then the choices, whether you're using mixed methods, mono methods, or multiple methods. And then the time horizons, whether it's a cross-sectional study, i.e. you've taken data obtained today and you've analysed that data that you've taken at a moment in time, almost like a snapshot, a photograph that freezes time. Or is it a longitudinal time horizon, something like a time series analysis where maybe you're crushing beams to destruction and you want to see how long it takes and how much pressure it takes to crush a beam or a concrete cube to destruction. Only at that stage do you get to the heart of your techniques and procedures, the way that you collect data, the way that you analyze data, whether the data is quantitative or qualitative. And this is a major mistake for many young researchers, that they describe their methodology as quantitative and qualitative. And yet quantitative and qualitative, you'll see from this diagram here, are purely types of data. So you have to work from the outside of this research onion into the inside to set up your methodological approach first, And only then, at the final stage, do you talk about quantitative or qualitative techniques. In terms of analysis, two broad categories. We have your quantitative data. We've got a nice time series there, or you've got qualitative data. Both techniques are equally valuable. Quantitative data is a good way of summarizing a vast array of data very quickly and being able to give estimates in terms of percentages or models or values attributable to that data that best summarize it. Your qualitative data, the words and reasoning, that discourse, that conversation, if you will, with people, is where you can gain greater depth and penetration. Now, let me give you an example. Someone conducts a survey and they say 50% of students at University PETRONAS believe that this is an exceptional university. Well, the question I would then ask is, how many students were interviewed? Was it 2? Because if it's 2 students, then, you know, that 50% score isn't too impressive. But also the question I would ask is, why do they feel that their experience at the university is so impressive? Is it because of the quality of teaching? Is it because of the quality of resources or the quality of staff and the help and support that staff give to students? Is that the reason? And this is where qualitative data analysis comes into its own, because you can take the quantitative statistics and start to drill down and find out more information about the reasons why those statistics are the way they are. As we look into findings, we first can look at using infographics again to discuss the concepts. We can introduce figures and tables into the narrative to make the read more informative. We should look to make sure that all figures and tables have numbers and titles. We should point out the differences between our work and the work of others. Having disagreements in academia is a good thing. That's to be encouraged. So if you do find differences, that's good, not bad. Show relationships between the phenomena under investigation. Discuss the negative results. You may start research thinking that you can expect to find a certain set of analysis, and when you've conducted the research, the findings may reveal something completely different. Those negative results are equally as important to report upon as positive results. Make key results prominent and clear to the reader. Make sure that people can see what the major findings are. Don't mix findings with discussion. Your findings should only talk about the factual evidence that has arisen within your analysis and nothing more. Refer back to your aims and objectives. Make sure that your aims and objectives have actually been fulfilled, that you've addressed those within your findings. And importantly, avoid being verbose. Now, just a note on being verbose. I can sit down this evening and I can write perhaps 10,000 words for a research paper in an evening. Would that work be good quality work? Absolutely not. Or I could sit down this evening and spend the same amount of time, maybe 3 or 4 hours, writing a speech which is only maybe 200 words long, and yet to write those 200 words and to make those words impactful and to generate excitement in the audience would probably take as long as writing 10,000 words quickly. So it's easy to write lots of text, but the key is to write in a concise and lucid manner that is informative to the reader. In terms of discussion, there are 4 key areas that you may wish to consider. First of all, the theoretical contributions of your work. What are the major things that you've added to new knowledge, or you've proven within that new knowledge? That's the first area. And linked to that, the practical contributions of your work. Who can use your work in practice? How could they use the work? You know, what would be the product of the research that you've created? You've also got the limitations of your work. Every research paper has limitations, and linked to those limitations, directions for future work. What are the things that you would point others towards moving forwards to address those limitations? All of these 4 sections, so really, if you think about it, could be included in that discussion. So you could, in your skeletal plan, you could have 4 bullet points in your skeletal plan. You could have the theoretical contribution, practical, limitations, and future work. Then you can start to add on, you know, the finer detail of what you think those theoretical contributions are, what those practical contributions are. And that's all the skeletal plan is. In terms of conclusions, there are 2 branches and probably 4 key areas to look at. First of all, a brief summary, and I do emphasize brief. So what results will transpire if appropriate action is not taken? That's the first section that you can write about. You could also write about how you can universalize your research. How does your work compare to existing knowledge within the wider body of knowledge that you've reviewed in your paper? You can also start to elicit polemic debate. In other words, you're getting people excited about your work and you're trying to incite them to contribute to the debate and do other related research in this field. So you could provide warnings to suggest consequences. In the case of the environmental research we talked about earlier, the big sort of area at the moment is global warming and global climatic change. If we're not careful, what we do today could produce a second version of Mars, a very barren place that is inhabitable for humanity. So we could provide that sort of catastrophic warning to humanity, or we could provide recommendations. These are the things that we need to do from a constructive point of view to make sure that the research doesn't go to waste and that we can actually apply the research in practice. Now, this notion of being able to apply the research in practice means that your research is impactful. And if your work is impactful, it has value. It actually gives something back to society to help fellow humanity. And that's really important. That's why we're all in research, to make a difference. So now let's look at a skeletal plan framework. And what I would urge you all to do is to start writing down your skeletal plan today and talking that through with your supervisor. And again, talking to Ahmed, if you want me to come along and give maybe another talk in the future, I'm more than happy to do that, or even run a workshop and talk you through your skeletal plans. So first of all, let's look at some templates. And there are at least five, I count, different types of paper that you could create. The first one is a literature review paper, and that is the first paper that you will probably write as a young academic. Anyone can write a literature review paper today. There's nothing stopping you doing that. You just download literature and away you go. You might want to do a conceptual model. And a conceptual model is where you create maybe a theoretical framework or a process flow diagram or something that explains a phenomena in great detail and possibly presents not only the challenges but also the solutions to those challenges. Often a conceptual model is an untested model and so therefore requires future deductive research to test the theories that you've created. You could move on to a proof of concept. So if you're an IT practitioner or an engineer and you want to piecemeal put together, say, an Industry 4.0 solution to a piece of digital technology, you could create that as a schematic. You could show how the thing works in practice, but you would then have to go on to develop that proof of concept via an analytical paper. The analytical paper is your next paper where you collect data. That could be primary or secondary data via a number of different techniques. And that analytical paper will perhaps be one of your strongest papers that you produce. And I would certainly urge you to put those analytical papers into the very best journals. We can also have an experimental paper where you're working with materials, say in the laboratory, or you're working with maybe an ethnographic piece of research where you're working with people and you're using observations to record people's actions and words and comments and how they behave and write that up as an experimental paper. So you can see here at least 5 different variants of research paper or report that you can produce, and there is nothing stopping you again today either developing a literature review paper or a conceptual model paper. And for anyone who's doing a PhD and listening to this call, the more papers you publish, the greater the validity of your work when you come to do your examination. So bear that in mind. 2 common formats for a research paper: the standard, which is used in most papers and reports, and then the literature review format, which is an increasingly popular type of approach that is being adopted in contemporary literature. Let's take a simple comparison. With the standard, you'll note that the literature review comes before the methodology, but with the literature review paper, the methodology comes first. Now you may be saying, why does it come first? Well, essentially with a literature review, each unit of analysis is represented by a publication. So your secondary data is a meta-analysis of those publications where each publication is a unit of analysis. So you have to establish the methodology first before you then go on to do the literature review and the analysis of that literature. I have got a brief guidance note that will accompany this lecture, and I'm quite happy to share that guidance note with colleagues at PETRONAS today. So if you need that, please do ask and I will send it over. And then finally, let's look at some references and in-text citations. Again, people often get this wrong, so let me just give some quick examples. This is a fictitious piece of text. And if we're quoting what someone has said, a direct quote from someone, we would say their surname and then the year in parentheses or brackets. If we want someone to refer to the work of others, we put CF. And if there are 3 or more authors, we always use et al, which are italicized, and then the year, all of which in parentheses. For 2 authors, both surnames and year in parentheses, and then for a single author, just the surname of that single author and the year in parentheses. So these are the 4 main approaches: a direct quote, 3 or more authors where you're referring to the work of, use CF, for 2 authors, and for a single author. I tend to always use a Harvard referencing system. Journal papers are the top quality papers, so note we have the surnames and initials only, followed by the year, the title of the paper, the title of the journal, the volume number, issue number, PP number, and importantly, the DOI, the Digital Object Identifier number. You must include that for all journal papers. For a textbook, it's again, the surname and the initials, the year, the title, this time the publisher, place of publication, and similar to the DOI, we should include the ISBN number so people can refer to the textbook through their libraries if other people want to follow your research. And then finally, a URL, a unique reference library number. In this case, the Control of Vibration and Work Regulations, UK standard. We put in the statutory instrument number, published in London, the UK, owned by Crown Copyright. And then we put here, slight difference, the available via, with the link to that document, and then the access date, the date at which we accessed that publication. So these are the main 3 sources of literature that you tend to use. I would suggest an 80-20 split. 80% of your references should be journal papers and only 20 to textbooks and URLs. Now you may ask, why would I suggest that? Well, the answer is simple. It often takes 12 to 24 months to publish a textbook, another 6 to 12 months to get the textbook circulated, so that's 3 years. And often by the time you access the textbook, it's already 3 or 4 years old, so that's maybe 6 years old now. So by the time you're reading that textbook, it's already out of date. A URL, if it's a reputable source like a government source, and even then some governments around the world aren't exactly truthful, my own government included, we do tend to twist the facts sometimes or give a bit of spin. So you can't necessarily believe what are contained on websites, because anybody can publish any old rubbish at any time on the internet, and it's totally unregulated. So just be aware that URLs have to be used with caution. If you're going to use them, focus on government websites or professional, reputable professional practice guidance documents. But as I say, 80% journal papers. And that concludes my lecture for today. So I would like to thank you all for listening today to that presentation. I hope you've enjoyed the presentation. I hope you've learned something new. And more importantly, I hope that's helped you with your own research writing and writing for your own research paper. And I'm now going to call an end to that presentation now. I think I'm on time, yes. It's taken me around about 50 minutes to get through that. I'm now going to open the floor to any questions and from the audience. So Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, for
My pleasure.
It was very informative and I learned a lot from it. I hope the other participants also found it very informative. Now, as Prof. David Jones said, that the floor is now open for the question and answer sessions. So if any participant have any question, you may ask from the Prof now. Is there any question from any participant regarding the session?
It's very quiet. I must have stunned people there. I am very friendly, no matter whatever the question is. Feel free to ask. I'm here to help.
Yeah, Prof. Me personally, I have one question from you.
Okay, fire away.
Prof, may I know what is the difference between a research objective and research aim? Is there any difference between these two terms, research and research objective?
Yes, the aim of your research should be what you aim to do within the research. So, for example, you could say that the aim of your research is to analyze the impact of heavy metals upon, or rather the impact of heavy metals upon the environment. So that would be your aim, but your objectives would be what you hope to achieve as a result of fulfilling that aim. And I would say a key objective there is to mitigate the negative impact upon the environment. It could also be to ensure that there are opportunities to recycle those heavy metals and actually generate further income and business from the resale of those heavy metals, or it may be to reduce waste that is being ploughed into landfill. So your objectives are what you aim to achieve from fulfilling your aim. And that's the easiest way to remember that. Has that answered your question, Mujahid?
Yes, Prof. Thank you very much for your explanation. If any other students have any question, you may ask here. The floor is open to all of you now.
Oh, I can see another comment in the chat there. What are the differences between literature review for an article and literature review for an MSc or PhD? The answer to that question is that there is virtually no difference. The only sort of finer nuance between the two is that for an MSc or PhD, it tends to be more verbose, it tends to be more complete, and you have to write down the basics within an MSc or PhD. But in a research paper, you're talking to people like myself, 450 heading towards 500 papers now. So you don't have to talk about the finer nuances of all the basic information. You can assume a certain amount of knowledge. So that's the only minor difference, is that with an MSc or a PhD, you tend to write in volume. You might write 20, 30 pages, maybe even more as a chapter of a PhD or an MSc. But in a research paper, you might only write 2 or 3 pages of literature review. So there's quite a difference there. And then the next question, what to do if we're facing writer's block? Okay, writer's block is a common phenomenon. We all experience writer's block from time to time. And what I would suggest you do if you get writer's block is to write what I would call a mind map. And a mind map is similar to a skeletal plan. Get yourself a large A3 or get two A4 pieces of paper and stick them together and start to write your ideas on paper as a bubble flow process. And if you can do that, if you can doodle on that paper and write down some of your information into this visual mind map, just words and maybe graphics, just to show the key things that you want to write about, when you go back to your paper, you'll be able to create a logical narrative around that work, that mind map, and that will enable you then to identify small, manageable, bite-sized chunks of research that you can write on. So it's important. Writer's block tends to occur when you're thinking about the bigger topic area. And the best way to do that is to write a skeletal plan or to write a mind map and then pick a small section of work to do and write about that small section first. And if you do that, you'll find that you will overcome your writer's block. And then finally, question from YouTube. I would like the prof to explain if it is good practice to cite a review paper in my article. There is nothing wrong with citing a review paper in your article at all. Nothing wrong with that at all. You can do that. That's perfectly valid. Sometimes a review paper is a very useful paper to cite because that review paper will establish the contextual boundaries for your research, and so therefore citing a review paper is a good starting point. So please feel free to do that. I can see that Gad Mahmoud Anwar has got his hand up.
Yes, assalamu alaikum, Doctor.
Good afternoon.
First of all, I would like to welcome you to and thank you for your amazing session today. And I have a question. And my question is, usually when I'm writing, I'm trying to write a paper or something, I used to open other papers like in the same field or in the same aspect and try to follow them. But usually this make me get distracted by reading the info and the knowledge included in these papers, and I find that I spend a lot of time, but I didn't write anything. So when I'm trying to write the paper, what is the good procedure to do this? Because this is like when we are starting to write the paper, it's difficult for us to write.
Yes, now I understand that, and I'm just writing a textbook on the moment on how to write a research paper, but I can come again in the future and talk about these issues in greater detail, or give another lecture if you feel that would be advantageous. But in essence, in answer to your question, what I would suggest is that reading the entire paper is completely the wrong thing to do. What you should try to do, first of all, are you using things like Scopus or Web of Science, Gad? Can you hear me, Gad?
Yes, Doctor, I'm with you. I can hear you.
Okay. Stay online just for a moment while I ask you some questions. Are you using Scopus or Web of Science to do a literature search?
Yes, I do. I use Scopus, Web of Science, and also Google Scholar.
Okay, good man. Well, what you should first of all try to do is identify your keywords that you want to research into. And when you use Scopus, for example, you can now download the titles, abstracts, all the bibliometric details of the papers that you've selected using your keyword search into an Excel downloadable database. And that's very, very simple to do. What you should then do, say if your literature identifies maybe 200 or 300 publications, each one of those publications is going to average around about 10,000 words. And the problem is, as you're reading those papers in their entirety, your own personal thoughts and views about the research are, if you like, biased by the research of others. And at the same time, you're giving yourself an absolutely huge task to do by reading all those papers. So what you should first try to do, take the database that you've downloaded from Scopus, and you should try to thematically group the publications into their broad areas first. And then what you should do is take each area in isolation and read the abstracts only to identify those papers that are relevant and interesting for your research and those that are absolutely essential for your research. Now, out of about 200 papers, you may find that only 5 or 6 are absolutely essential for your research, and all the other papers tend to be useful in terms of background information or background references to standards and other things that you can reference. It's only those 5 or 6 papers that you need to read in great detail. The vast majority of papers, if you read the abstract, you should, provided they're a good research paper, be able to understand what the paper is about, what the major findings were, and what the originality of the paper was. Because if you look at the skeletal plan given today, the originality, or sorry, the purpose, the methodology, the findings and the originality should be contained within that abstract. So my advice to you today, Gad, is if you're trying to read each and every paper in its entirety, you're probably doing the wrong thing, because you're just filling your head with lots of material and you're not structuring the literature in a logical and efficient manner. So my advice to you would be, open that Excel database, start to thematically group the literature into key areas. And that approach, you will use something called interpretivism. And interpretivism is you interpreting the literature and grouping that work in a logical manner. Does that make sense, Gad?
Yes, doctor. But the problem is when I'm in the writing stage, I already passed the literature review stage. I already organized my publication, and I know I have there like around 5 or 6 papers. They are very, very important to my research. And maybe when I'm trying to write, I try to follow these papers. I'm trying to write my paper now, so I'm trying to follow these papers. But when I'm trying to follow them, I just keep reading the paper again and again and keep distracted from writing. This is my problem.
You mustn't, Gad. If you've already written down your literature review and you're now in the writing of your paper, you at the end of your literature review, you're then into the methodology, and that should then be all about Gad and what Gad is doing. When you're then into your methodology, you may draw on literature to justify your methodology, but again, each and every methodology is different. So again, it should be about Gad and what Gad is doing. The findings is all about what you found. It's all about Gad again. And ditto the discussion. It's about what you interpret from the findings that you've got. So again, it's all about Gad. And into the conclusion, again, it should be you, the voice of the author, adding to knowledge. So again, that should be about you again, not other people in other literature. What you can do at the end of your paper, Gad, once you've added in that knowledge and understanding about your own research, you can then refer back to existing literature, what some people call extant literature, and you can then start to compare and contrast between their literature and yours to see whether there are any differences. But you shouldn't be allowing that existing literature to dictate what you write in your paper.
Yes, I understand, Doctor.
I think we might need maybe at a future date, Gad, I can run a workshop session where some of you guys can share your work, and I can perhaps give you guidance on screen. That might work, because I can then have a better understanding of what it is you're trying to do and the approach that you're trying to do it with.
Of course, this will be a very good thing. Like, we always welcome the cooperation with you, Doctor.
Inshallah.
Inshallah.
Okay, Prof. We have another question in the group chat. There is one lady, Noor. She is asking about that. Can you explain the key points to write in the abstract? Is it need to have relation between aim, objective, methodology, and result, and summarize it all? So she's talking about abstract.
Okay. So with the abstract is you have to write about the aim, and normally the very first line of your abstract will be something along the lines of this research aims to, and then you say exactly what the work aims to do. It's as simple as that. You can use 1 or 2 sentences and that's it. You shouldn't be giving lots of background and context, because the purpose should tell the reader in no uncertain terms, this is what the work aims to do. The methodology should then talk about either the philosophy or the type of reasoning adopted, maybe the type of data analysis, maybe the type of validation. So, for example, you could say something along the lines of, in a single sentence, the epistemological design adopted used a mixed philosophical approach of say, I don't know, interpretivism and positivism. This work then adopted deductive reasoning and used, I don't know, the analysis technique of multiple regression to predict X, Y, Z. So that would be just a sentence or 2 on methodology. Then the findings, obviously, you had a sentence or 2 about what you found from the research. And then in terms of originality, you have to say what's novel and original about your research. So in terms of those 4 areas, those are the main 4 areas that you need to write off in your abstract.
Thank you for the explanation. No problem. Noor, I hope Prof answered your questions. There is another question in the chat box, that is there any preferable number of authors for the journal publication? He is talking about the number of authors in the publication. Okay.
It very much depends on your standing as an academic. If you're a PhD or MSc student, it's normally advisable to have you as the first author, because you're the person writing the work, and then your 2 supervisors or 3 supervisors at the end of the author list, because your supervisors are giving you intellectual stimulation and they're guiding you through your research. So I would say in your early days of your research, you may work with a small team of possibly 3 or 4 people. When you then graduate and you've got your PhD, you may wish to publish, 1 or 2 papers on your own as an individual author, just to show your academic acumen. But then as you get towards being a reader or a professor, you're then back to working in teams, because you then have your own students, you're then working with other academics, and that could be up to, I don't know, it could be 5 or 6 authors again, up to maximum on a paper. If you're working in health sciences or physics or mathematics, you could have papers which have 20 or 30 authors on, but that's very uncommon within construction, built environment, civil engineering areas. I would say the norm is round about 3 to 4 authors.
Mr. Ibrahim, I hope Prof answered your question. Thank you, Prof. We have another question in the chat box. One is, the name is Narendinas. He is asking about the abstract. What is the difference between finding and originality in the abstract?
Okay, you can do a load of research now today to look at, I don't know, the impact of yeast added to flour to make bread. Yeah. And you would generate some findings that would say that yeast proves the bread and makes the bread bigger. Yeah. You then put it in the oven and make a loaf. So that's a finding, but there's nothing original about that because everybody knows that is just a fact, and people have written about this hundreds and hundreds of times, probably thousands of times previously in the literature. So the findings are what you find from your analysis, but the originality is what is new or novel about your work. So you've got to try and make sure that your research is original so that you're investigating an area that hasn't been investigated before, or that, if you like, is the pure route, pure invention, or the other option is to investigate a problem that has been researched before, but using a different theoretical lens. So in other words, you could look at this research and you could use a different methodology. You could use a different data analysis technique. It could be based in a different geographical area with different social political issues. And that is the main difference between findings and originality. Findings are basically talking about what you found in the research, but your originality is what is new and novel. What have you discovered as a result of doing that research?
Thank you, Prof, for the explanation. We have another question in the chat box. He is talking about the subscription and the open access journals. He said that in your opinion, is there any difference in terms of publication quality between closed and open access journal with the same impact factor?
Okay, it's an interesting question because lots of people are asking this. I've just started publishing some open access journals, a journal called Buildings, published by MDPI, which is an open access journal. But I would say that even with the established journals like Elsevier or Emerald or Taylor and Francis or even Sage, that those journals also offer what they call a gold route, where you pay for your paper to be published, and that paper is then freely accessible to anyone and everyone. So what's happening at the moment is that you're finding that open access journals, we have a mixed bag. We have some very good open access journals that publish high quality research, and what they do is that they give free tokens to prestigious academics, and those prestigious academics do not have to pay to be in that journal. And then other younger academics who maybe have won a research grant or their institution is investing in them then have to pay the full fee, often in Swiss francs. But the established journals are doing the same thing because they basically give a gold access route to people to publish. So in answer to your question, it very much depends on the actual journal itself. So if you look at, I don't know, what would be a good one? If you look at automation in construction, which is by Elsevier, the impact factor of that Elsevier journal is very high. I think it's 4, 5, or maybe more. So it's a very high impact factor. Some of these MDPI journals have an equally high impact factor. Others not so. So what you need to do, I would suggest, is to go into Shimago, and I'll type that on the side here, Shimago, And if you do a search in Shimago, you can identify which journals are based in the Q1 and Q2 rankings of Shimago, and those are the ones that I would advise you to go for, regardless of whether they're closed or open access. Without trying to dodge the question too much, so I'll answer the specific question now. I've talked around it. Open access journals are a relatively new phenomena. And so I think that they have got room to catch up in terms of quality compared to other journals, but they are catching up rather quickly now. And so I would say that some of those open access journals are equally as good as some of the maybe moderate to weaker closed access journals. And don't forget, you can have closed access journals that are a Q4 and Q3 rated. So judge on Shimago, not on whether they're open or closed. That would be my advice. Now, I did see a guy called Kimber have his hand up earlier. I don't know whether, because I think I've answered all the questions now, but Kimber, did you still want to ask a question? No? Okay. Maybe not. So I think I've come to the end of questions now, I believe.
I
yes,
think
Prof.
Ahmad Farouk Kaniber.
Ahmad Farouk, you want to ask something?
Yeah. Can I ask?
Yeah, sure, you can.
Are you hearing me, bro?
Yes, I'm here waiting for your question.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, first, thank you, Prof. I'm Ahmed. Thank you so much for this amazing session. Actually, I have.
Assalamu alaikum.
Yeah. Yeah. Hi, Prof. Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah. Thank you. Actually, I have a small question. What is important? Wa alaikum assalam, Prof. Thank you. Yeah.
Sorry, Ahmed, could you repeat your question?
Actually, I need. Thank you. I need to ask which is more important? Published 2 good papers or 5 papers in small journals. If I have research idea and this research idea can be published in 2 Q1 highest impact journal or 5 Q2 regular journals, which was more important?
Okay, well, that's a really good question. It very much depends on where you are with your career.
Yeah.
Because if you've never published before and you manage to publish in a Q2 journal, then that is an absolutely amazing achievement and should be applauded and you know, congratulated on, because that would be absolutely excellent. If you're, however, a more experienced researcher, let's say you've now got 10 or 15 papers under your belt, a few conference papers, a few Q3s, a few Q2s, then really what you need to be aiming for then in that case is more Q2s and Q1s on a regular basis. So it very much depends on the stage at which you're at as a researcher, because I work with undergraduates today who publish their work in Q1 and Q2 journals on a regular basis. But that's because, you know, I've published lots of papers now, so I know how to publish and what to write. But those undergraduates now, as I say, the minimum sort of threshold now is Q2. But I'm an experienced researcher. And so this is what you've got to think about. Are you somebody, Hamid, who is, you know, starting off your research career? In which case, if you get in a Q3 or a Q2, then you've done extremely well. As your career progresses, you need to focus more on quality, because if you publish in a Q1, that Q1 paper will get cited more than a Q2 journal. And I can give you an example of this. Let's take my own profile as an example. I'm now up to, I don't know, 8,000 citations, something like that. Most of my high cited papers are from Journal of Construction Engineering and Management, Automation in Construction, IEEE Transactions, ECAM. All these good Q1 journals are the ones that predominantly get the high citations. And sadly, therefore, if you continue as a mature academic to publish in lower grade conferences, your citations will not increase. Your visibility as an academic will not increase, and therefore your opportunities to further your career as a world-leading researcher will be diminished. So learn from my example and try to publish in Q1, Q2s consistently once you're an established academic. But as an established academic, recognise that the PhD students under you will need to start as young academics, perhaps in Q3s, Q2s and conferences, until they learn how to publish in the Q2s and Q1s on a regular basis. So it's all about learning, and it's all about your experience, and also importantly upon your individual experience. Does that answer your question, Ahmed?
Yes. Thank you, Prof, so much. This is amazing answer. Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure, Ahmed. Bless you.
Prof, I have one question in the personal chat box.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, the participant is asking about citing a review paper in his article. His question is, it is a good practice to cite a review paper in my article?
Well, again, it very much depends on the context of what you're using, because review articles tend to be some of the most highly cited articles in a field. So if someone, say, for example, in that review article has used the Prisma technique, I'll just write that on the side here, Prisma. So if they've used the approach to literature review, yeah, then you may want to cite that paper because you may want to adopt a similar methodology within your paper. Or they may have adopted a scientometric approach using things like Voss Viewer, or even they may wanted to use Voyant tools. So again, if they've used these techniques, you may want to cite those papers to say that you've adopted a similar approach or a similar method in your literature review section of your paper. So it depends very much on the context. If the context is that you're referring to the work of others and their approach, and you're in some way replicating that approach, then yes, it's a good thing to cite that paper. If you're saying that that paper in some way is an exemplar of best practice, then you can't really do that, because a literature review paper uses an interpretivist philosophical position, and interpretivism, whilst it's good for analysing a vast body of literature, it's also subject to the individual researcher bias. So again, it very much depends on context. Does that answer the question?
Yes, Prof. Thank you so much. With the absence of any question, we are going to conclude the session. But before concluding the session, we want to have a photography session with the participants. So I requested to all the participants to please switch on their cameras for the photography sessions. Kindly requested all the participants to please switch on their camera. Assalamu alaikum, Prof. Respected participant, please open your cameras. All are requested to please open the camera for the photography sessions. We should wait for 1 to 2 minutes because participant is opening their camera.
I will say, lovely to meet you all this morning as well.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Peras, are you here? God is in between us. Peras, you may please proceed towards the pictures. I hope all the participants open their cameras. We have more than 25 participants in the session, but only few of them are open their camera. Shall we wait more?
Yes, I'm done for now. If any other participants want to share, then we can wait. Otherwise, I've clicked the photos.
I think you may proceed now.
It's done, Mujahid.
Okay, you have done?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Thank you, Paras. Thank you so much to all the participants for their precious time and kind support. I hope all of you are learn a lot from the today's session. I really thankful to the Prof. David Jones and welcome again to him to joining the UTP and PGSCE committee. Have a great day ahead and wish you best of luck for your future endeavors. Hope to see you in the next session, all of you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Stay safe, all. Bye
Yes.
now.
Stay safe, Prof. Stay safe. And
Okay.
blessed.
See you again, inshallah.
Inshallah, see you again, inshallah.
Bye now. Bye.
Assalamu alaikum.
Yes, Prof. Thank you. See you, inshallah. Thank you so
My
much.
pleasure. My pleasure, guys. My pleasure. Bye now. Have a blessed day. Bye.